Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office Community Town Hall, our virtual town hall, which takes place every month. Want to welcome all of our residents and stakeholders, our partners in law enforcement, as well as city government. Thank you all for being on tonight. My name is G. Lamar Stewart. I'm the Chief of Community Engagement here at the DA's office, and we're excited about tonight's presentation and discussion on juvenile justice reform. I'm joined today by several of my colleagues here at the District Attorney's Office, and I'll ask that each would introduce themselves, talk a little about their academic and educational background, or academic and professional background, I should say, just briefly. But just before I introduce them, we want to thank you again for tuning in every month and being a part of these discussions. Of course, each month there's a different topic, and we have an opportunity to highlight different units as well as staff here within our office. And our goal is to always remain transparent, but also to take the opportunity to educate the community on the amazing work that's taking place here at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. And so I'm excited again tonight to have staff from our juvenile justice division, three panelists tonight who have very extensive careers and backgrounds in juvenile justice work. So tonight we have first the Assistant District Attorney, Robert Listenby. Secondly, we have our juvenile unit supervisor, Assistant District Attorney Derek Combs. And lastly, we have with us our Director of Juvenile Diversion Programs, Assistant District Attorney Jordan King. I'll ask in that order that they would unmute themselves and just give a brief introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, G. Lamar. I'm very pleased to be here this evening to talk about what is certainly my favorite subject, and a subject that to which I've devoted most of my professional career. My name is Robert Listenby. I'm First Assistant District Attorney for Larry Krasner here in Philadelphia County. I began my academic career in a public high school in Midwest Michigan. I was very fortunate after working very hard as a high school student to get a full scholarship to Harvard University. After completing Harvard, I went to the University of California, Berkeley, where I studied law. After completing Berkeley, I tried a few other things besides a law career. I was a construction manager in different parts of the country, and then moved on to work for the Public Defender's Office in Philadelphia, the Defender Association, where I worked for 27 years. During my tenure at the Public Defender's Office, I worked as supervisor of the juvenile unit for most of the time I was there, for about 16 years, and assistant supervisor for a few years. I think the key thing I want to say about my time working with the Public Defender's Office is that most of the success that I had, the biggest success we had, was reducing the footprint of the juvenile justice system here in Philadelphia. Our view was that we were causing more harm to a lot of young people than good when we placed them in the system. When I say our view, I work closely with a former First Assistant District Attorney and Deputy District Attorney of Family Court, George Mosey. And because of George's commitment, we were able to work together and collaboratively across the board to bring about a lot of changes in the system. After working there for 27 years, I was very fortunate to get appointed by President Barack Obama to head up the juvenile justice system for the nation, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, where I worked for 4 years, focusing on a lot of policies for reforming juvenile justice, and eventually found my way to the District Attorney's Office here in Philadelphia. I'm very happy to be here because I believe fundamentally that Larry Krasner is focused on fundamental change to the entire criminal justice system. The most important unit that he wants to focus on is juvenile justice. I'm very happy to be working with him. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. My name is Adara Combs. I am the supervisor of the juvenile unit here at the District Attorney's Office, Philadelphia, under Larry Krasner. I am born and raised in Philadelphia. I went to the Philadelphia High School for Girls, also known as Girls High, over at Broad and Alany. After that, I went to Franklin and Marshall College, which is in Lancaster. It's a small private liberal arts college. While there, I studied both government and economics and public policy with a focus on social economics and urban city development. After that, to decide what I wanted to do. In that, I found my way to the district attorney's office in 2010. After a brief stint as an account manager for a Transfield Services Group. Started working at the district attorney's office in 2010, December specifically. I was in Juvenile doing juvenile diversion work with our youth aid panel, as well as a few of our other diversionary programs. In 2011, I entered law school in the evening and continued to work full time, mostly for financial reasons. And then I graduated in 2015, became an assistant district attorney, have done a lot of different things in the office, from prosecuting gun and drug cases to being in our charging unit. I was in our traffic court unit. And ultimately, I ended up in family violence, sexual assault, where I did jury level family violence, domestic violence, and sexual assault cases. And then I was appointed as the assistant supervisor of the juvenile unit in early 2020. And then at the end of 2020, I became the actual supervisor of the unit and have been such for the last few months. During my time in the office, I've been fortunate enough to be able to find my way and figure out what it is that I'm most passionate about. And I found that I was most passionate about not necessarily trying cases, which is really great, and I really do enjoy it, but mostly about helping people. And I find myself doing that in various forms, whether it be through helping victims of crime when I actually am in court doing cases or hearing about their issues and their victimization, or if it be making the right decisions and doing the just thing when it comes to reviewing cases, and making sure that I handle cases with care, and ensure that every person that finds themselves involved with the system is treated fairly. That's what I find my passion in. So in being a prosecutor, I've been able to do that in multiple ways, specifically working under District Attorney Krasner, implementing policies that are fair and just, and also victim-centered.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time. My name is Jordan King, and I'm the Director of Juvenile Diversion Programs at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. I've been in this role since August of 2020, and I currently oversee the implementation of post-arrest juvenile diversion programs in the city and county of Philadelphia. I've been with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office since August of 2018, and I've previously served in the municipal court unit and the juvenile unit. I've now lived in Philadelphia for the past 10 years, and previously I spent my time in law school in the Child Advocacy Clinic, working with youth in Philadelphia's dependency space. Additionally, I've worked in the Philadelphia school system since 2011. I've provided mathematics mentoring, conflict resolution education, and musical instruction to students at Penn Alexander, Heston Elementary, and Sayre High School, respectively. Prior to this role, I interned at the Public Defender's Office in Broward County, Florida, and I worked with the Legal Aid Service of Broward County, Florida as well. My time working with students in Philadelphia led me to pursue a career in juvenile justice, and I was applying to opportunities in juvenile policy work when I crossed paths with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. I saw the opportunity to create meaningful change, and I have not looked back since. I attended the University of Pennsylvania for undergrad and law school, and I'm honored to be here with all of you this evening. Thank you for your time and your attention today.
Thank you, First Assistant Listaby, ADA Combs, as well as ADA King. Well, we have our conversation today will be broken into two different sections. We'll have the general questions that my staff and I came up with for our panelists. Then we have some pre-submitted questions as well from stakeholders all around the city. If you did not have the opportunity to pre-submit a question and you would like to pre-submit a question, please send that question to Seth Myers, my assistant. You should see his name in the chat feature, and he'll make sure that we get the question over to us and hopefully be able to ask all the questions tonight. Just before we get started with the general questions, I do want to give a few shout outs to some stakeholders that I see that are on tonight. We have some students from Dobbins High School who are with us. And so shout out to Dr. Tony Damon from Dobbins and all the students. And we see Nasir Holloman is on tonight, one of the students from Dobbins who will be asking questions shortly. And also we want to give a shout out to the Office of State Rep Donna Bullock. We see that you're on with us tonight. Thank you for being on today. So our first general question is for First Assistant Bob Listenby. Can you please provide a general overview of the juvenile justice system in Philadelphia, the institutions involved, how it operates, and its scope? You have to unmute there, Bob.
Let me talk about this in terms of three separate components. First, the juvenile justice system itself starts at age 10 and goes to age 18. So any child who commits an act which would be considered to be a criminal act if the child were an adult, and that's the legal language involved, will go into the juvenile justice system. Once in the juvenile justice system, a child can remain there until the child turns 21 years old. So that's the main part of the juvenile justice system. There's a second component to the juvenile justice system, which is direct file juveniles, juveniles who are age 14 or above and commit an act which would be considered with a gun usually or a deadly weapon, which would take them into the adult system where the case would start. Those cases are under the Krasner administration have overwhelmingly been returned to the juvenile justice system, but they start off as adults. There's a third component to what I would call the juvenile justice system, which is what I call homicide cases. If you're charged with a homicide, you are automatically in the adult court. You can be charged with a homicide at age 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and up. Once you're in an adult court, for the most part, homicide cases are dealt with in the adult system. And once they're dealt with in the adult system, you can be sentenced to an adult sentence under the current United States Supreme Court. The court has mandated that juvenile life is not life, but any period that the court determines, typically up to age about 35. Now, in the juvenile justice system, just in terms of the scope, it's important to recognize the system is focused on rehabilitation. We're supposed to make kids better when they finish the system than they were when they started. Most cases involve pretrial diversion or probation, and a few cases involve children going into residential placement. I want to just say a shout out to Adara and also Jordan and their team, because during the Krasner administration, the number of young people who've been in residential placement has been reduced from about 609 when the Krasner administration began in January 2018 to just about 108 at the present time. So thereabouts those numbers. So numbers are down dramatically, almost 80%. And you should note, for those interested, that the cost of residential placement starts probably at over $100,000, average probably about $150,000. But if it's state placement, secure confinement behind razor wire, those placement costs are over $200,000 a year per child.
Thank you so much, Mr. Listenby. Adara, this next question will be for you. Please discuss any changes made in recent years to how the DA's office approaches incidents and or cases involving juveniles.
Absolutely, thank you. So the office has changed its policies directed towards juvenile offenses drastically. So as I indicated when I introduced myself, my time in the office predates the Krasner administration. So I've kind of been able to see the office through multiple lenses. I also interned back in 2007. So I've been able to see the office through various administrations. So in that, there's been a lot of changes that I've observed myself with my own two eyes. We've gone from charging a lot of cases in the high thousands to charging way fewer cases. So that's a change. And I think that that's a collaboration between our office as well as the police department. And Jordan will get into diversion options and different things like that. But I think that's a direct reflection of policy initiatives by the district attorney's office and collaborations between our office and various entities. In addition, once cases do come into the system, we treat them very differently than we did before. Previously, when cases would come into the juvenile justice system, there's always been a focus on rehabilitation and restoration, but it looked a lot different. So now one of the policies that came out in 2019 under District Attorney Krasner mandates that whenever possible, juvenile prosecutors are to look at various options prior to an adjudication of delinquency. And allow me a second to explain what that means. So adjudication of delinquency is the juvenile language for a finding of guilt, essentially. So before we get there, there are a lot of different steps that allow us to say that, yes, we understand that whatever happened was not correct. And yes, technically under the law, it is criminal, but we're going to do something different than brandishing and or branding rather, and labeling this child as a delinquent. So we have options, two options. One of them is a reporting consent decree. So one of the policies that that whenever possible, we offer a reporting consent decrees to youth. So that's a 6-month diversionary option, so to speak. Now, it's not like what's under Jordan's umbrella, which is pre-court diversion. It's still monitored by the court and still monitored by juvenile probation, but it's what we do with cases when we're like, okay, we need to address this, but we don't necessarily want to further entrench this youth in the juvenile justice system. And after 6 months, if the juvenile, shows us that they learned their lesson and they've moved on and that they are on to greener pastures, so to speak, we will dismiss the case and they'll be able to move on without any type of stigmatism that comes with adjudication delinquency. Beyond that, if that's not possible for whatever reason, whether it be because the case doesn't allow for it, whether we feel 6 months of supervision isn't enough, or let's say this is someone who has come back into the system, unfortunately, after having been involved previously, we have the option to defer adjudication, which basically means that we've made out our burden as far as the charges go. But we're going to give this youth an option to show themselves, more importantly, and show the community that they are amenable to getting back on the right track and going forward and, kind of leaving this action behind them. And that's also within our policy. So if we can't seek an RCD, which is what a reporting consent decree is called in short, our next step is to seek an deferred adjudication. Previously, our numbers for adjudicating youth delinquent was much higher than they are now. At this point, by standard within the office, adjudicating a youth delinquent is our last option. In addition, like First Assistant Liston B mentioned, we've also lessened the amount of youth that are out of home and out of the community. District Attorney Krasner has implemented 2 policies that I think are key in its outcome. Like First Assistant Liston B said, the number has gone from 608 to 109 this past December. And the reason being is 2 very important policies that District Attorney Krasner put into play. So one of them is that we are, by standard of the office and by mandate rule even of the office, to seek community-based dispositions whenever possible, meaning that we don't seek to place youth as much as we did before. That's why you see that drastic number. That's almost 82, I'm going to say, % drop in youth that are in out of community placement. So that's one policy that led to that drastic decline. In addition, anytime we are seeking placement, because let's say it's necessary, there are some youth that unfortunately we do need to service out of the community, whether it be for their safety or for the safety of the actual community. And when we do that, we seek facilities that are as close to home as possible so that they're not far removed from their family, from the things that are familiar to them, because studies have shown that when you keep youth as close to home as possible, even when they're physically removed from their home, their adjustment is far better. The reacclimation is far better as far as when they come home, and that they just fare better in the long run. So those are policies that we've taken from best practices and from our observations of the juvenile justice system, and we've put them into standards for the office that have led to great outcomes.
Thank you, Adara. Our next question is for Bob. What do you think constitutes a successful versus unsuccessful outcome for juveniles who have involvement with the criminal justice system?
Well, G. Lamar, I think, first of all, we have a mandate for all assistant district attorneys in this office, which is that they are to treat all defendants in the adult system and all juveniles in the juvenile justice system on an individual basis. We're trying to determine what the needs and issues are that bring a child into the system and to address them. I like to think of it as looking at it from the point of view of a parent. If a child comes to you with a problem, they have an educational deficit, they have mental health disorders, they have substance abuse disorders. What do you do for a child if it's your child? You try and find a way to help address that problem and try and get them back on the right track. And then you kind of move them along in the right track and in the right direction. The right direction for most kids is heading to get education, to get employment, to have life experiences that help them grow and develop and prosper. And so we're trying to do the same thing with the juvenile justice system. Oftentimes it has not worked in the past because the institutions that we were working with, be it Glen Mills, where they were beating up on our kids, or many other institutions throughout the state, they were just not paying enough attention to our kids. They were warehousing them. They were making a lot of money, keeping our kids in placement, and not really giving them anything that they would come home with that would necessarily improve the likelihood that they're going to get jobs, be able to finish school, start families, and so on. So those have been the problems. We think success now is having our children in a system look like everybody else's children, with high aspirations and goals, with the tools to be successful in life, be able to get jobs, be able to get employment, be able to get an education, be able to kind of aspire to be successful. And so if we can give them some of those skills along the way and get them out of the system as fast as possible so the system does not stigmatize them, so they don't lose develop a sense of, lose their sense of self-esteem because they're in the system, then I think that's what we're really trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Bob. I think Adair wanted to add a comment there.
I did. Thank you so much, Julimar. I appreciate it. So one thing came to mind as Bob was speaking, and I wanted to mention this, and it's important that I mention this because as community members, I think it's important that you understand what happens to youth at the onset. And there has been a policy change in regards to that I just missed. So charge it to my memory. So one thing that I think is important is when youth come into the system, meaning they get arrested and they end up facing some type of criminal charges. One thing that we do is we hold way fewer children than we did ever before. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we learned a lot about our children in local custody and the amount of youth that we needed to have, or rather the number that we would need to get that down to in order to safely have youth in custody when necessary, whether for serious offenses or whether because, quite frankly, there are youth in Philadelphia who they don't have a place to go. And at that point, we're trying to figure that out and not necessarily hold them in custody indefinitely, but rather hold them in custody until we figure out that next step. So we have been able to drastically drop the amount of youth held in local, the Juvenile Justice Services Center, which is the local juvenile detention center, down to close to 100. I believe at its lowest, it was at 102 or so. Right now, today specifically, it's at 108. At its highest, it was close to 150. So I think that that's quite telling as well. We hold way less youth in custody at the onset of their cases because we're looking to viable discharge options. And I think it's important to know that when we release these kids, we're not necessarily saying, sayonara, we'll see you later, hopefully you fare well. We're making sure that there are actually things set up and in place for them to go home to someplace that will be corrective, that will look after them, that will care about them, that will guide them through this process. So that way they can have those successful outcomes that Bob was just mentioning. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case people had questions about what happens early on in the process.
Thank you, Adair. Jordan, this next question is for you. What is a juvenile diversion program and what kinds of cases involving juveniles are diverted?
Thanks, Julimar. I'd actually like to start with a quote. "We must allow someone the opportunity to restore their sense of goodness in their families and in their communities. When we deprive them of that, we create the monsters that we fear." Now that's a quote from Dr. Ken Ginsberg. He's an adolescent physician at CHOP. And I mentioned that quote because that's precisely what juvenile diversion is. It's an opportunity for youth redemption within a framework that promotes community safety, facilitates victim restoration, and establishes youth accountability. So juvenile diversion in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office is a pre-court program that reroutes youth from the traditional juvenile justice system to community-based programming. So not only is it an opportunity for youth to avoid system involvement with judges and probation, it is also an opportunity for youth to avoid a juvenile record and the stigma and collateral consequences that can come from juvenile justice system involvement. For example, a young person could be diverted to a conflict resolution and boxing program, or a cosmetology program and entrepreneurship program. And to answer the second part of your question, Julimar, historically, only first-time youth with nonviolent offenses were offered diversion opportunities. Additionally, any youth held in secure detention post-arrest would not be considered for diversion, regardless of the offense. The Krasner administration recognized that this closed off the diversion pathway for too many young people, so he's made the following policy changes. First, a prior record will no longer automatically exclude a young person from diversion consideration. Next, second and subsequent arrest while in diversion will no longer automatically reroute that young person's case back to the traditional juvenile justice system. Instead, an individualized determination will be made to see if we can safely and responsibly continue with diversion. And if so, we will incorporate a graduated response approach, increasing programming, services, or resources to accommodate the youth's unique needs. And lastly, all cases are reviewed for diversion eligibility, regardless of detention status at the time post-arrest. And in terms of what success looks like for diversion, we've worked closely with Stoneleigh Fellow Adam Serlin to redefine traditional success calculations for the juvenile justice system. So in order to promote community safety, facilitate victim restoration, and establish youth accountability, we lean heavily on the community to provide youth with pro-social skills, independent living skills, moral reasoning skills, academic skills, and workplace development skills. So of course, continued attendance and programming and the completion of diversion is success for us, but we also strive to assist youth and their families with sustainability resources in the areas of wraparound supports and any other supports that can help youth avoid long-term system involvement. Our goal is to pull more youth into diversion programming, and our ability to do so hinges on the strength of our community-based programs, services, and resources.
Adair, we had a question that just came up in the question feature from Betty Jean Nobles. It says, "What happens if your office determines that the youth's home is the major problem because they have not observed positive examples or rewards for positive choices?" What do we do in those as we're reviewing cases and making our determination as to whether we're deferred or what options we have before us? How does that play into the decision-making process?
So I think that's a very interesting question. And I think it kind of takes two different parts. So I'm going to address each part in kind. So if we determine when reviewing a case, even whether it's at the charging stage or beyond, because quite honestly, a lot of things don't become known to us until after the case has kind of started its life and we start to get information, whether it be self-reported from the youth when they talk to juvenile probation, or whether it be from their attorney, or whether it just be from observation of our attorneys in the courtroom. When information comes to us regarding the safety of a youth in their home, that's a very different consideration than if it's influence and whether it be their surroundings, generally speaking. So we try really hard not to punish youth from where they come from, right? So if a child comes from a circumstance that's not befitting as far as their safety, then obviously we have to address that. And that may require us to find an alternative place for that youth to be, whether it be because there's criminal activity taking place in the home, or whether it be because they're simply not safe because of lack of care. But when we find that youth just simply lack the structure, and when they lack the positive influence and positive support that we like to see youth have in their homes, there are a lot of different things that we can do. So we have various programs where kids can go after, well, in the normal world, they can go after school. Now they kind of go in a hybrid sense, sometimes after school in person and sometimes virtually, where they have mentors, where they have programs. In fact, just last week, Tuesday last week, I went over to the CIC, and Lamar, don't ask me what the acronym means because I always get them mixed up, but it's a community-based program for kids who are involved with the youth. And when I went, I was kind of amazed. Like, they have a music studio with like an actual booth. They have a computer lab where they have like the mixer where they can make music and do all types of things. They have dinner, they have snacks, they go on trips, and it's a positive place for them to go where they can start to get some of those positive influences and positive reinstallations that we wish they had in their home. And hopefully through that and through interfacing with their parents and putting different, or guardians, whoever that may be, and putting different services in place, we're able to rebuild that structure that may be lacking. So when they are no longer involved with the system, which is always our hope, they'll be able to go forward and have those things in place that they were lacking before. So we take a very holistic and individualized approach into putting things in place with youth, so that way when they're no longer system involved, they'll be able to have those things absent our oversight.
Adair, appreciate the response. I tried to be as quick as possible to do a Google search of CIC. I found the website, but I could not find out what it stands for. So
I'll let you guys know. I always get them mixed up.
I appreciate it. So the next question is for for First Assistant Bob Listenby. It's coming from Kristen from First District PDAC. This is one of our pre-submitted questions, and I'm sure our victim advocates who are on tonight, really would have this. This question is near and dear to them as well. So, how will juvenile justice reform impact gun violence?
Well, Lamar, certainly that's one of the most difficult questions we're dealing with now. There's certainly a crisis in gun violence in our city, as is evidenced by the shootings that took place at the Olney SEPTA station last week. First of all, as regards defendants, young people who come into our system who are engaged in gun violence, Most likely, if they have a gun, they're engaged in shooting at someone or shooting the gun towards someone, they're going to start off in the adult system. They will be direct file juveniles. Under the Krasner policies, we've redirected those young people back to the juvenile justice system. When they get back to the juvenile justice system, what's going to happen is this. First of all, you're going to receive this same individualized attention that anybody else would receive in the system or anybody would receive in the adult system. Why? Because we know that individualized concerns about the specific issues that juveniles raise is the best way that lead to a good final solutions for them. What we're going to do is look at the reasons that brought them into the system to find out if there's any basis whatsoever for them to be involved with gun violence. Then we're going to try and figure out how we can address their needs, issues, and concerns. For the most part, young people who are engaged in shooting at other young people are probably going to be held at the detention center, and the chances are very good that they may actually go into residential placement. My big concern, and I've expressed this over and over again to court administration, family court, is that we need appropriate facilities for our children who are engaged in gun violence. We do not want to throw them away. We do not want to toss them to the wind in some remote facility 300 miles away from home. We want to treat them right here in the city and county of Philadelphia and provide some sort of treatment that will help them understand the risks that they're engaging in if they have guns on them. For a lot of young people coming to the system are only in possession of guns. We're going to treat them the same way. We're going to give them individualized attention that they deserve. And we're going to see what we can do to figure out why they had guns, how they got guns, if there's anything we can do to prevent them from getting guns in the future through prevention programs. They are not as likely to go away for residential placement into residential placement programs, but we're going to make sure that they're held appropriately accountable. They learn from the experiences that they have with the guns. I want to talk about this in one other area. People who are engaged with gun violence often do things that cause serious harm to victims. We're going to make sure that the victims of gun violence receive support from the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. They're going to receive the kind of support that's mandated by law through our victim witness coordinators or through our community-based programs. We're going to make sure that they get the support. If they need different kinds of assistance so that they can heal, they need hospital support, they need support in terms of injuries that have caused in terms of helping them get back on their feet. We're going to do whatever we can to help them under the mandates of the law. This is a very difficult kind of challenge for them. One of the problems that happens with a lot of young people engaged in violence, if they're victims of violence, many of them feel like they want to do one of several things. First, many times they want to retaliate. We want to find out, see if we can get to those people who have been traumatized by gun violence and prevent them from retaliating. Sometimes they're so traumatized that they just simply want to go into a shell and not be able to engage in the community or in schools or anything else in their life. We want to make sure that we encounter them and see if we can deal with the traumas that have impacted them so that we can get them back on the right track. And again, sometimes they just want to go on about their business, leave school, leave home, leave the community. We need to engage people who are victims of violence so we can help them in any way that we possibly can to get back on the right track. And we need to make sure that the people who shoot them are held accountable.
Bob, you've been talking about victims, and I appreciate that, which pivots to a follow-up question here. Our Victim Witness Services Unit falls under your leadership, as well as our CARES program. I'm going to ask Seth to put into the chat feature the hotline number for our CARES program, as well as for our Victim Services Unit. Can you talk a little bit about our CARES program as we're talking about gun violence and homicides and the work that they've done pre-pandemic as well as through the pandemic?
When the Krasner administration began, we were very fortunate to have a lot of forward-thinking folks who recognize that one of the most difficult times in a person's life is a time when they are informed that a family member, a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife, mother, has been shot and killed. So our CARES program comes in on day one, day two, tries to see what support we can provide for the family. Typically, they need support to do really basic things. They need to oftentimes go to the morgue to identify the person that's been killed. We try to support them there. A lot of times they need help in arranging funeral arrangements. We try and support them there. Sometimes they simply need food. We try and support them there. Sometimes they need transportation. We try and inform them of the various resources that are available under the Victims Act to make sure that they can access all of those supports. The people who are part of our CARES programs are co-survivors of homicides in most cases. They've lost a family member. So when they interact with folks who are newly victims of homicides, they tend to bring the sensitivities, the compassion, the understanding of trauma to those circumstances that's needed. And they really try and help folks out. Under the pandemic, it's been more difficult because we can't take folks into the hospital now because they won't let us in the hospital. We can't take folks into the morgue because they won't let us in the morgue. We do work closely with them. Sometimes our care folks can't even go into the homes because of the pandemic and fear of catching the virus. So we've still tried to do everything we can to connect with the families who've been victims, where there have been victims of violence, and do everything we can to support them as we go forward. This is a difficult time for our city because of the high level of homicides that we've had. But we're doing everything we can with our CARES program, with our victim coordinators program, and also working directly with law enforcement to try and prevent the level of violence that we have going on the streets of Philadelphia.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lisby. Dara, we have a question in the chat from one of our stakeholders that we work very closely with, Saya Bigham. Ms. Saya Bigham is one of the board members for Harrogate Civic Association out in Kensington. She wants to know more about the role of stay-away orders, or what role does stay-away orders play in diversion. She says many repeat offenses occur because there is no perceived restriction attached to diversion. Can you or Jordan talk a little bit more about that?
Probably more focused towards Jordan's work. So I'll let him take the lead on answering that question and then chime in after he is done.
Of course, and thank you, Gilmar. Any young person in which there is a victim attached to that case in the diversion receives a stay-away order in which the young person must stay away from not only that person, but they cannot make any contact with that person through third parties, through social media contact, through technology as well. It is made very clear to any young person who fits this category that that young person will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law if they in fact do violate the stay-away order. We do have resources in terms of detectives on staff to ensure that young people do comply with the terms of that order, and then we rely on the rest of the resources through the rest of the juvenile unit and the court system if it does in fact rise to that level.
And just to piggyback off of that, sorry, Jiglamar. So and I assume that this is how this answer would go. So if a case does lend to the fact that, through retaliatory comments, or, a lot of times in juvenile cases, they're Instagram messages and Facebook messages and text messages and things like that. If we get information about that, we do feel like it needs to be court involved, we will take that case out of diversion and address it in court if the situation just heightens to the point where that becomes necessary. So we kind of work in tandem, but I wanted Jordan to focus on the aspect of stay-away orders as it pertains to diversion cases when they stay in diversion, because we do try to keep as many cases in diversion as we can when it's feasible and when it's safe. But when it becomes unsafe, we do have the option to send the case to court and have a judge address it. And if necessary, if it becomes violent, we can obviously escalate our response to match the necessity as far as keeping the community safe and keeping everyone involved safe.
Thank you both. The next question will be for Dara as well as Jordan. I'll ask my assistant Seth if you can elevate a young man named Nasir to panelist status. Nasir is a high school student at Dobbins High School. He's going to raise his own question today. We work collaboratively with 14 schools citywide here in the city and county of Philadelphia. And one of our schools that we work with is Dobbins, and Nasir was picked tonight by Dr. Tony Damon, who's the principal at Dobbins, to ask a question tonight. Just before he raises his question, I'm going to ask a question from Principal Tony Damon from the Dobbins High School. What, if any, partnerships do you currently have in place, or are you considering as preventative measure? And that's for 88 Combs as well as 88 King.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me greet you, Nasir. Hi, Nasir. It's nice to meet you, and I'm excited to hear your question once we get to it. But to answer the question posed by Principal Damon, the partnerships that we have as far as preventative measures and ongoing are extensive. I'll allow Jordan to discuss the preventative partnerships because he is working tirelessly day and night, weekends included, even probably when he sleeps, to build those partnerships. So I really want to give him the opportunity to talk about them. But as far as partnerships beyond that, the DA's office is constantly partnering with people and constantly working in collaboration to make sure that we can get the best outcomes possible. Just a few weeks ago, we had the opportunity to do a press conference, and we talked about the collaboration between our office and the courts, our office and juvenile probation, our office and the public defender's office, our office and the defense bar. We're constantly collaborating with various entities to make sure that we are receiving as much information about the young people that we deal with as possible, but also responding to their needs as best as we can, and also making sure that we are able to continue the court system going to address their needs and make sure their cases don't fall into a limbo status like much of the justice system around us. So those are examples of collaborations that are just ongoing, and they may not be preventative in the sense that we are dealing with cases that are actually happening, but whenever prevention is presented as an opportunity, collaboration with a lens towards prevention, we're looking towards those options as well. And I'll let Jordan speak to the multiple programs that he has in various lanes that deal with preventative and diversionary options.
Thank you, Adara. And hi, Nasir. We look forward to hearing from you. In terms of early intervention programs, in January of 2019, youth had 8 different service providers from which to choose from. Now in February of 2021, youth have 21 different options ranging from arts programs, music programs, sports programs, conflict resolution programs, entrepreneurship programs, and financial literacy programs as well. In terms of prevention specifically, to combat the school to prison pipeline, we work closely with Chief Kevin Bethel and the excellent work that his team is doing with the police school diversion program. So this is a program in which qualifying students are not arrested, but they're rather diverted to prevention services to meet their underlying needs. And this is a large collaboration, including the Family Court, the Department of Behavioral Health, the Defender Associate of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Police Department, and the city's Department of Human Services. And in order to address the complex behavioral concerns that arise from a number of environmental factors, as well as adverse childhood experiences, we work closely with Community Behavioral Health and the Department of Behavioral Health as well. And lastly, in juvenile diversion, we work closely with Women Organized Against Rape. We've recently partnered with them, and we make sure that WAR provides awareness and prevention education to our youth, in addition to therapeutic and trauma-informed services as well.
Thank you so much, both ADA King as well as ADA Combs. Nasir, so glad to have you on tonight, man. Thank you for joining. Young King, we're extremely proud of the work that you're doing at Dobbins, and we know you have at least one question tonight. You've asked a few in the chat feature, so I'm going to ask if you can raise one of those questions. Just unmute yourself. And I just wanted to say, you got a little feedback there, Nasir. I don't know what environment you're in. Try to unmute one more time, brother. There's something going on with your connection. Do me a favor, Nasir. Just turn off the Zoom and then come back on. We're going to find you and elevate you again, because we certainly want to get to your question, all right? There seems to be some type of connection issue there. All right, we're going to come back to Nasir in just 1 second. Principal Damon, thank you so much for being on tonight. We also want to give a few other shout outs. We have some other stakeholders, Sarah Ashley Andrew, who is the founder of Dare to Hope, one of our community organizations here in Philly. So glad to have you on. Principal Tish Douglas from the Longstress School out in Southwest. So glad to have you on. Our friends from South Philly, South Philly's Victim Services Division. So glad to have you on. And Andrea Custis. So glad to have you on. Appreciate all the work that you do at the Urban League of Philadelphia. Our next question is coming from Betty Jean Nobles. She's a 35th District resident up in Northwest. What kinds of, and I'll ask Bob and Jordan to respond to this, what kinds of authentic programs and job preparations are available for young people with academic and mental health needs, particularly those suffering from neglect, sexual or physical abuse? How can we develop more effective family and community support?
G. Lamar, if it's all right with you, I'm going to defer to Jordan to start off, and I'll finish off with a couple comments I have.
That'll work.
Thank you, G. Lamar, First Assistant Listen B. We work closely with a program called Philly Connect, which is essentially a one-stop shop for young people. Youth are connected with licensed clinical social workers who discuss topics ranging from mental health and wellness during the pandemic, to one-on-one counseling. They also connect young people with jobs, and they've actually connected youth to paid employment opportunities. And they also have an Achieve 3000 lab in-house, in which young people can work on their academic needs actually in person at the facility. We also have other job programs in the areas of electrician training, cosmetology training, food services, advocate and mentorship roles. We also have a program that offers youth paid internship opportunities through coding and web design. Not only do they provide a path to earning high school credentials, but they've also provided youth with paid employment opportunities. 88% of youth earn high-wage jobs at the end of that experience, and the average income for a young person who completes that program is $36,000. In terms of other job programs we have, this week we're excited to pilot the Youthpreneurship Program through Uplift Solutions. This offers entrepreneurship training, supportive skills, soft skills education, and case management to youth in diversion. So youth will meet regularly with case advisors who each have a background in psychology, and they provide cognitive behavioral therapy, behavioral modification services. They'll work to reduce barriers to success, including addressing food insecurity, housing needs, childcare needs. They provide one-on-one counseling. And in terms of the entrepreneurship skills they provide youth with skills ranging from customer service, cash handling, sales, computer skills, introduction to business, developing a business plan, how to run a business, establishing an LLC, and much more. They have a partnership with Deloitte and through Brown Superstores so that young people can be afforded part-time jobs at the conclusion of those programs. And I'll now pass it back to First Assistant Listening.
As you can see, I defer to Jordan because he really does know this information inside out. I want to stress two things. One, my hat's off to Adair and Jordan and the Juvenile unit. Throughout the pandemic which began last year in March, Adair, Jordan, and their team have been working in court throughout this period of time. This has been unusual in Philadelphia since many of the people in the remaining court system have not been functioning at all. The criminal justice system has thousands of cases in the backlog, but thanks to their leadership, to Adair's leadership and Jordan's leadership and leadership of others who they worked with, we've been able to do an awful lot to look after the interests of our children. These are our children, and they work tirelessly. When I say tirelessly, I've been on the phone with them at 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. I've been on the phone with them on weekends because they really are committed to this. And I think that Philadelphia should be proud of these young people who are doing such a fantastic job. So that's one thing. The second thing is not quite as visible to everyone as I really want to stress, and that is this. In the past, and I remember this, the city and county of Philadelphia spent as much as $125 million a year on juvenile justice services. That amount has been cut back quite a bit. But what's most important, and I ask people to really listen to some of the things that Jordan and Adair have been saying. The money used to go to all these programs outside of Philadelphia, as far away as 300, 400, 500 miles, and some as far away as Texas. Now what we're trying to do is shift to the community and spend money in our community for our children with help from our families and our professionals, because we have people who can take care of our kids. But the leadership required to do that came from D.A. Craftsman, who said, go do it. And then people like Adair, who knows how to do it. And people like Jordan, who is a fountain of youth and also wisdom about how to do these things. So I want folks to recognize we're shifting to the community because that is the source of influence and power and the right place to take care of our children. So I want to stress that. Thanks.
Thank you both for responding to that question. Looks like we have one of our young scholars back on again, Nasir Holloman. Try to unmute now, man. We're going to see if we can hear you, brother. We can't hear you. All right, so look, this is what we're going to do. Nasir, do me a favor. I want you to send us your question in the chat. We'll make sure that we raise it. But we're really excited that you tried to get on tonight. If you can, I know we asked you before, if you can, just turn your computer off, turn it back on, try to log back on to see if your mic situation can be corrected here. We're so
And Jude, right. I don't know if this is helpful to you. I've been looking at the question and answer, and I do see Nasir's question here.
Okay, go ahead. Can you read that for me, Adair?
Sure.
Right.
And hi, Nasir. I'm glad that you were able to get back on. Sorry, your sound isn't working. Hi. So the question that Nasir wrote, and Nasir, you can shake your head or nod it if I'm asking this question wrong, because this is your question.
I'm sorry, real quick, Adair, I'm going to ask Seth if you can put us in gallery mode, so at least as Adair is asking the question and answering the question, at least folks can see Nasir, this young king who's on with us tonight. So thank you so much, Nasir, for being on. I'm sorry about that, dear.
No problem. I'll wait until Seth puts us in gallery mode so everybody can see Nasir.
We're in gallery mode now.
Wonderful. So Nasir's question that he asked at 6:24, which is 26 minutes ago, was, do juveniles have any special rights or protections in court? Nasir, did I get your question right? Okay, wonderful. And was that question directed towards me, Nasir? Okay, so I'm going to answer your question for you. So absolutely, the answer is quickly, absolutely. And I'll explain what I mean by that and how I'm able to answer it so quickly. That's a very good question to ask, because people should be concerned about the rights that they have when they're in court to make sure that their rights are being protected, right? And I'm assuming that's why you asked that question. So the reason, the long answer is that when a kid comes to court, they have rights just like adults do. So they have a right to an attorney, someone who's going to represent them and make sure that they're taken care of and that no one does anything bad to them. They have the right to be present and be physically in the courtroom when things are happening with their cases. They have the right to speak, but they also have the right not to speak, which is also very important. And they're can seek guidance from their attorney as they're standing in the courtroom. They have the right to be treated fairly and be treated well. And they have the right to, more importantly, hold us all accountable for the actions that we take that impact them. So that is the abbreviated version of the answer to your question. And if you have a follow-up, please feel free to ask more. But that is the short answer to your question. Jordan, our first assistant listen bee, do you guys have anything to add to that answer?
I don't have anything to add, Adara. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Nothing to add either. Thank you, Adair.
Thank you, Nasir, for being on today. And we appreciate all that you're doing. And we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks back on our chat with our community engagement team and the students at Dobbins. All right, send our hellos to all your classmates, bro. Our next question is coming from Donna Clement from the office of Council Member Derek Green. I'll ask Bob Listenby to answer this question. Has there ever been any consideration to putting a cap on the length of incarceration based on age? For example, if a child commits murder at the age of 12, is there a maximum that they can be held? And if they complete various programs and undergo therapy, is there any way to reduce their time?
There are some legal caps that currently exist. If a child commits a murder at age 12, the court, all murder cases are adult cases by definition. They're not direct file. They start off in the adult system. A judge can entertain a decertification hearing and transfer that case back to juvenile court. If the case is transferred back to juvenile court, then unless there's some special conditions that are set on the transfer, the maximum time the child can be held under the supervision of juvenile court is until age 21. Now, what often happens in cases like this is the attorneys work out arrangements where a child can go back to juvenile court because they can receive treatment, supervision, and rehabilitation in juvenile court. And some of the charges are kept in adult court so that if the child is unsuccessful in juvenile court, that an adult sentence can be imposed. We don't have that system here in Philadelphia. It's not used very often. Occasionally, the rare circumstances used, but for the most part, it isn't. Please recognize that under the series of cases that began with Roper v. Simmons in the United States Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court decided that children who commit homicides under the age of 18 cannot be killed. They can't be electrocuted. The court then went further using all the information about adolescent development and trauma and concluded a few other things leading up to the most recent cases, which basically say, first of all, you can't get life without parole for a non-homicide case, and you can't get life even for a homicide case. The court has to reconsider that. That's how we ended up with the juvenile lifers in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the epicenter of juvenile lifers in the entire world. There are more juvenile lifers coming out of Philadelphia than out of the rest of the state or out of any other state in the union, out of any country in the world. We put more kids in jail for life out of Philadelphia than any place else in the world. And as a result of United States Supreme Court litigation, the constitutional requirement is that children be given an opportunity for parole and for a hearing and sentencing. The average sentence that's coming out now across the country is somewhere between 30 and 40 years for children who are given life without parole for homicides that they commit. DA Krasner has been involved in resentencing over 100 of them, and DA Krasner sentences tend to be about 5 to 10 years less than the previous administration. And the good thing, which I would like to stress for everybody who's listening, there's been a study conducted of over 100 juvenile lifers who've gotten out in the city and county of Philadelphia. And as of the most recent data we have, only one person has been arrested and convicted of a crime since the juvenile lifer movement began, essentially beginning more than I guess about 7 or 8 years ago. So young people are redeemable. They can learn from their mistakes and avoid future criminal activity. That's what we've learned from the Juvenile Lifer Program.
Thank you, Mr. Listenby. Speaking of juvenile lifers who have come home and done some amazing work, we're excited tonight to have on with us Don Ike Jones and Donnell Drinks, who co-founded an organization called Grown. So glad to have them both on watching tonight. Also, Toby from Central Victim Services. So glad to have you on, as well as Alexis from Councilmember Jamie Gaudet's office. So glad to have you on. Our next question is for Darren Jordan. It's from Thomas Dealey, who's a faith leader in our city. How can community members, particularly retired adults, contribute to improving the juvenile justice system?
Well, Mr. Dealey, you're going to regret asking me that question because you're going to be like, you know what, I'll just go back to work after this. So I think the short answer is get involved. There are so many programs and so many opportunities to interface with young people that we can fill the void, or at least it's my belief that we can fill the void that a lot of them have within their homes and within the communities that immediately surround them by getting involved in their lives. And there are so many different avenues to do that and to be a positive force for young people, whether it be through community activities within your church, or I see that you're a faith leader, so within the church or within whatever your religious organization is, whether it be through getting involved with schools or getting involved with various programs or activities, specifically with the district attorney's office, and Jordan can speak to this more in depth. We do have a community-based diversion program that seeks volunteers. In a previous life, I worked to train those volunteers and select them. And it's so important to have people who actually care about young people and their future and have the time and energy to invest in them, that they do so. We can't complain about the things that young people do if we're not willing to put our time on the line and our energy on the line to be a part of the correction. So that is my answer. That is my call to service, so to speak. And to the extent that you're able, and anyone within your affiliation is able, get involved. Get involved in any way that you can. And also speak positivity into these young people, right? Like, speak encouragement into them. And that's most important. Young people like Nasir, who have the ability and the, I don't even know what to call it, the amazingness, for lack of a more eloquent word, to get on a conversation like this and ask a question. There are adults who won't ask questions in spaces like this. So when you have the opportunity to speak positivity into them, and for our young people who are court involved or who have been court involved, allow them to be redeemed. Bob just spoke about young people and redemption. We have to continue that same talk and that same walk when they are no longer court involved, and don't hold those things over their heads. So to the extent that you're in a position to do that, I would also encourage you to do that as well.
If I may, I would just like to add one thing. I learned from young people. I mean, I asked the same question to young people and they told me this. They said, first of all, I want you to believe in me. So let's assume that number one is get engaged with me, because you have to get engaged with a young person for one. Number two is believe in me. And what you often find is that mentors and people who are working with young people believe in young people more than young people believe in themselves, until young people can believe in themselves more than the people who are working with them. And the third thing they always say, and this is what really is where the rubber meets the road. When you're working with a young person, it's trying, it's difficult, and sometimes they do things that just stretch your belief in them. It's at that moment, that critical moment, when you cannot give up on them. Never give up, never give up, never give up. If you don't give up on them, when they lead you most and when they try you most, that is the turning point where they turn their lives around. So that's what the young people told me, and I've heard it over and over and over again. So those are the 3 points I would like to suggest.
And thank you both. I just would like to add that volunteering with the Youth Aid Panel program is still the #1 way for community volunteers to help out. So this is a panel composed of community volunteers and from the areas in which the youth are from. So if the young person accepts the program, the youth and their family appear before this panel of trained community volunteers who discuss the incident, they facilitate victim impact and participation, and then they select 3 conditions that the young person must complete. Examples of these conditions could include an interview with somebody who holds the career of the young person's choice, restitution paid to the victim or an apology letter to the victim. And then lastly, a program term, which it could include, for example, that conflict resolution or boxing program, or a program with Beyond the Bars, which is a musical instruction program / career readiness program. The research shows that one of the opportunity structures that facilitates adolescent development is relationships with authoritative yet relatable adult figures. So please get involved. We're always looking for new community volunteers. You can visit our website just by typing in YAP, Youth Aid Panel, phila.gov, or by emailing Seth Myers, included below, seth.myers@phila.gov. Thank you.
And also, if I could just add to that, G. Lamar, sorry for interrupting, just to show how important it is. I remember when I interned with the office in 2007, I heard about the Youth Aid Panel. And I was like, wow, that sounds really, really cool. Well, I was in college and going back and couldn't join myself. So I made my mother do it. And here we are. That was 2007. It's 2021. And she is still a volunteer. So it's very important work. It's very fulfilling. I see how fulfilled she is. She looks forward to it. She's retired now. But it's very fulfilling work on both ends. And the impact that you can have in a young person's life is just beyond anything that any of us could probably fathom.
I appreciate those responses. I'm going to ask Seth if you can put into the comment section each of our names, titles, and email address for the listening audience. Our next question, I'm actually going to jump down a question or 2. We have 2 very similar questions coming in. One from Minister Glenn Wilson, who I believe is a chaplain for the 19th Police District. I also know that he's an associate minister at the Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church. And also a question from Yvonne, a resident in Cedar Park. Minister Glenn asked this question: in the 19th District, juveniles have been carjacking seniors. If they really are juveniles, what charges could they be facing? If done with a gun, could they be charged as adults? And then Yvonne from Cedar Park raised, what are you doing about gunpoint robberies and carjackings in Cedar Park, some of which have involved young people? Bob, I ask that you respond.
Thank you very much for this question. I'm personally not familiar with any specific cases that are arising in Cedar Park, but if someone wants to contact me, I will certainly follow up on that. Young people who use a deadly weapon to steal a car do so, and their cases will be moved to the adult court if they are, 14 years old or older, and their cases will be begin as a case direct file juvenile cases. We have the option, looking at the case and dealing with it on the individual facts and circumstances of the case, to move that case back to juvenile court. Now, when we look at that case, it depends upon what the young person actually did. If you have a case of a person with a gun who shoots a senior citizen, that senior citizen is severely injured, and this is not the first offense, it's the second or third or fourth offense, it's possible we might not move that case back to juvenile court. Even though we believe that almost all cases should start in juvenile or go to juvenile court, sometimes some are kept in the adult court. Most likely they're homicide cases. When these cases get back to juvenile court, we're going to do what I've discussed before. We're going to judge the case on the basis of the individual facts and circumstances of the case and the facts and circumstances of the juvenile that's involved. Because there's a gun, because there's a carjacking, the chance, and because we want to hold children accountable and produce a safe community for our folks, we want to make sure that that child is held accountable in the juvenile justice system. We'll look at the facts and circumstances. Because the gun's involved, the likelihood is very likely that child is going to go to residential placement. Again, we want residential placements close to home in Philadelphia, if at all possible. And I say this recommendation with this set of facts in mind. The entire city of New York, after years and years of reform, I discussed this with the leadership there, and at one point in time during the last year and a half, they only had 12 young people in residential placement. So you don't end up with a lot of young people in residential placement. But when you send them to residential placement, they should get every possible assistance that you can possibly give. It's going to be very expensive, but it's a lot less expensive if you address the needs and interests of a child while the child is a child, rather than waiting until they get into the adult system. And New York has been able to dramatically reform their system and reduce their numbers the same way Philadelphia is going in addressing its system. So we're very hopeful that our system is going to continue along the path of reforming, and that we're going to end up with good results for our children at the end of the day.
Thank you, Bob, for that response. Adara, I'm going to ask that you would answer this question coming from Captain Malachi Jones, who is the commanding officer of the 5th Police District up on Ridge Avenue. Are there workshops and or mentorship available for juveniles interested in becoming an attorney?
Absolutely. So outside of my role in the district attorney's office, I also am the president-elect for the Barristers Association of Philadelphia, meaning I'll be the president in this next cycle. I'm also the vice president of planning for the National Black Prosecutors Association. So just off the top of my head, those two organizations have mentorship opportunities for young people who are interested in careers in law. In addition to that, Philadelphia is blessed to have a number of active affinity organizations. And when I say affinity, what I mean by that is that we're all affiliated with the Philadelphia Bar Association, and we have different organizations based off of demographic. So the Barristers is specifically for Black attorneys, and then there's different organizations for various other backgrounds. All of those organizations have mentorship opportunities and various programs ongoing to help young people that want to be attorneys. The National Black Prosecutors Association has a program that we have not been able to do due to COVID, but prior to that, we were partnering with Building 21 Charter School, bringing them into court. We did mock trials with them. We put together case files and let them play out different roles, and gave them an opportunity to see what it felt like to be the prosecutor, the judge, the defense, and ask questions. And they were quite good. So opportunities like that are always available. If anyone has a young person in mind that they think are interested in a career in law, my email is in the chat. Seth put it in there, and I'm happy to share it one more time so it doesn't get lost. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to point anyone in the right direction.
Thank you so much, ADA Combs. So glad to have Captain Johnny Walker from the 15th Police District on tonight. He added into the chat feature that the carjackings it's a citywide issue. And it's also occurring in other cities. He says around this time of the year, they're seeing an increase of carjackings, particularly or cars being stolen because of individuals keeping their cars running as they're allowing it to warm up, but also delivery drivers as well. So appreciate those comments, Captain Walker. I'm going to ask next question will be for Bob. It's coming from Lisa Cross from the Public Health Management Corporation. Can you provide information about the link between school children sent to detention and future contact with the justice system? Are school children of color treated more aggressively by the school penal system as compared to their presenting white peers?
Well, I'd like to say first, it's an excellent question, and we are at an extraordinary moment in Philadelphia for this reason. The former Deputy Commissioner, Kevin Bethel, former Deputy Commissioner of Police, who used to be in charge of operations here in the city and county of Philadelphia. I had a chance to work with him, and he's had sort of an epiphany. I remember him talking with me. He said, I did not get arrested. I did not become a police officer so that I could go around arresting 10-year-olds, having them do a perp walk down the hallways of their schools, having them handcuffed, pushing their heads down in the back of a squad car, taking them to the station so they could sit in a jail cell for 6 hours and be totally and completely traumatized by the experience. So what he has done in conjunction with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office and support from us and a lot of other places, with evaluations by Drexel University, is he's created a program where young people, rather than being sent to detention, And when I say detention in the juvenile justice system, what they do is they go to a prevention program sponsored by the Philadelphia Department of Human Services. Those prevention programs have worked phenomenally. And young people who've gone into these prevention programs have, for the most part, not come back into the, not had problems in the school system and not come back into the juvenile justice system. Through former Deputy Commissioner Bethel's work, the number of kids coming into the juvenile justice system in Philadelphia has been reduced dramatically, perhaps by over 1,000 to 1,500 kids a year. That number translates into thousands and thousands of kids who never see the inside of a jail cell and who do not become traumatized, do not get into the juvenile justice system, and do not end up in the adult system. So I think it's a phenomenal program. What's unusual about it is that it's not widespread. It's not being used in lots of other places across the nation. In fact, now people are beginning to talk to former Deputy Commissioner Bethel to try and imitate this program in other jurisdictions. But we are very fortunate because the numbers of kids coming into our system here in Philadelphia has been reduced dramatically. When I started, which is 30 years ago, mind you, the number of kids in the system was like 16,000 kids a year. By 2000, that number had been dropped to 10 to 12,000 a year. And now we're down to about 2,400 a year. So what's happened? The kids are finding other pathways towards success and not going through the juvenile justice system. And that is a phenomenal development. And we're working to reduce the number further. We, again, appreciate all the support we've received from the Philadelphia Police Department that has worked with us to develop diversion programs and working on a new unique diversion program that we're trying to get set up. So again, it takes lots of partners and lots of folks working towards the same goal, but we've been very successful at doing here in Philadelphia. So the answer is, there is a school to prison pipeline. Philadelphia is not a place where it is operational and moving forward. We've broken the back of the school to prison pipeline here in Philadelphia. And I'm so happy to be a part of that work with former Deputy Commissioner Kevin Bethel.
Bob, I have another question for you. It's coming from Reverend Clarence Hester, who is pastor of the Erie Avenue Baptist Church. A very similar question was also put in the chat feature from Charles Reeves, who's the president of the Tasker Morris Civic Association. And the question is, does the DA have any initiatives available to partner with the youth in our various communities, more specifically in the East Police Division?
Well, G. Lamar and I have gone out with our assistant district attorneys to the East Division. In fact, we have two of them who are assigned to the East Division at the present time. And we've been trying to figure out what it is that we could do in that district and across the city. The DA is currently actively planning to undertake a new initiative to help youth across the city and county of Philadelphia in the not too distant future. It is up to the DA to make that announcement, so I'm not going to make it here. But I can tell you that we've been working at this for the last 4 or 5 months, trying to figure out exactly what we can do as a district attorney's office to initiate some new programs that focus on helping youth throughout the city. So stay tuned. Check with G. Lamar Stewart, who knows a little bit about these programs that we're trying to initiate. And we expect sometime in the near future to develop them. I want to say this, though. This is not something that's coming around because of an election. We were working on this particular initiative going back to August of last year. We've had to go through the courts to try and figure out and find resources for it. And we've been working at it intensively. So I'm optimistic that sometime in the very near future, you will be hearing from District Attorney Krasner about a new initiative that he's undertaking.
I know I'm the moderator, but I'll just put on my panelist hat for 2 seconds and answer my own question. Reverend Hester, as well for Charles Reeves. Our community engagement unit here at the DA's office, we partner with 14 schools citywide, middle schools and high schools. We're focused on engaging and building relationships with students, as young as 10, 11 years old through 17, 18 years old. And we host what we call listening sessions. Pre-COVID, we actually went to the schools. Some of those schools are in East Division, Juniata Park Academy, Mastbaum High School. There's a few others that we recently partnered with in South Philly, Auden Reed, South Philly High, and a few other schools as well. But we're partnered with 14 schools citywide. And every third week of the month, we spend about 90 minutes in pre-COVID world in the school, and in a COVID world, it's all virtual, discussing, areas of, gun violence, public safety, bullying, and other hot topics with young people. And it's really an opportunity to listen to those the young people in those spaces. We also invite some of our excellent partners to join, as well as some of our assistant district attorneys and those who influence policy here in the DA's office, because we believe it's important for young people like Nasir, who we met at Dobbins, to have a seat at the table and for their voices to be heard as we consider policy here in this office. And secondly, our office, our community engagement unit, we host a program called One Stop Job and Resource Hub. And essentially, we bring together about 50 employers and other social service providers. Many of those providers have programs geared toward young people. And we convene that program every first Thursday of the month, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And so if you want more information regarding that, please reach out to myself or Seth Myers, my assistant, and we can get you more information. So thank you for that question. Next question is going to be for Adara. It's coming from Wadia Gardner from Hunting Park United. How is it that young people in Philadelphia cannot get a decent education or employment, but they can always find cannabis or a gun?
So that question truly does break my heart. And it's sad because it's true. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's not an accurate reflection of the city that we currently live in. Why that is the case has a lot of different levels of reasons. And if we were to go through each level of reason, first of all, I'd probably be preaching to the choir. But secondly, we'd be here all night. Right? Because there's so many different reasons that lead to why young people have greater access to guns and drugs more so than they do education and quality environment. And I think more importantly is the collaborative solution to that question. So obviously the answer has to do with legislation. It has to do with just the nature of the city that we live in, the city that I've grown up in for the past 34 years, and the nature of the environment that we have. But more importantly, I think as a community, we have to take ownership of the fact that the problem exists and decide what we're going to do about it, and decide how we're going to address it and how we're going to insulate our youth from this epidemic. I know epidemic is usually utilized to discuss diseases and infection and things like that, but we truly are dealing with a gun epidemic, a drug epidemic, something that's taking lives at the same rate, if not higher, than infectious disease and things of the sort. And that's saying that in the midst of COVID, we still have young people dying due to drugs and guns. And I think that as a community, we have to recognize that and decide where we're going to stand. Now is a very pivotal time in our lives. Lines are being drawn in the sand. You're either going to be a part of the solution or you're going to pretend that there's not a problem. And I think that luckily we live in a city where a lot of people are willing to be a part of the solution. And to the extent that we all can be a part of the solution, I think we can get to a point where our education system is better. Our means to have recreational activities. I see a lot of commentary in the question and answer about recreation and the funding for recreation. That obviously will place kids in a different setting that don't involve drugs and guns. And I think that's very important. Quality recreation, quality after school programs, and people who genuinely care about them and will see that those aren't the things that they're seeking, but rather they're seeking sports and that they're seeking further advancement in their lives. Those are the things that we need to put in place to make sure that they don't put their hands on guns and drugs, but rather on things that will further their future and further their minds.
Just before we go on to our next question, I see we have a comment from Marvin Smith from Darby Township, just raising questions as to how are we working collaboratively with young people on the ground, but as well as community organizations and community organizers. I see you mentioned folks like Lonnie Herndon and Ike Raw. W. Lonnie Herndon is the pastor of the Church of Christian Compassion, is a local pastor that we do a lot of work with. We actually are with him sometimes multiple times a week on the ground in Southwest Philly, or specifically in the Cobbs Creek area. We've done work with Ike Raw as well. Other organizations like Brother Kazar and Anton Moore, Stanley Crawford, Grown, who's on with us tonight, Donnell Drinks and Don Ike Jones doing a lot of work in the city, Man Up, SCI Phoenix. We can name a lot of programs that our office partners with to make sure that we are getting resources down to the ground or assisting those organizations getting to get the resources that they need, or highlighting those organizations organizations and our weekly press conferences that we have so that they can find the resources that they need to do the work. So I just wanted to make a comment on that. And thank you for your comment, Brother Smith. Our next question is going to be for Jordan and Adara. It's coming from Savannah, from Council Member Isaiah Thomas's office. How has COVID-19 affected the way that the DAO serves young people?
Happy to go first, Lamar, and thank you for the question. We've had to get creative in terms of using virtual programming, as everyone system-wide has had to learn how to adapt. So our youth aid panels have gone virtual, many of our programs have gone virtual, and we're grateful for organizations such as the Philadelphia Anti-Drug and Anti-Violence Network, who provides case management and wraparound support to our young people, ranging from addressing food insecurity, housing insecurity, helping youth obtain vital documents such as their driver's licenses, and organizations such as Philly Connect, who work to reduce barriers to success and have provided technical assistance to set our youth up for virtual programming. So we've had to adapt just like everyone else has nationwide, which has come with its challenges, but we're grateful for such strong partners who've helped us adapt fairly quickly.
And just to go off of that, we have absolutely had to change the way that we operate in response to COVID-19. And as First Assistant Listed Me indicated earlier, we have been revamping and changing and going with the flow just like the rest of the world. And it has required a lot. It's required endless days and endless nights that flow into each other to make sure that we're addressing cases. So I don't know if people know this generally speaking, but within the Juvenile Act, we have to review cases on an ongoing basis. Unlike the rest of the criminal justice system, we aren't permitted the option to just allow cases to sit without review or without any type of attention going towards them. That's actually a violation of the Juvenile Act. So because of that, we have had to, even before the courts opened, so the courts were closed in March, up until they reopened over the summertime, we were still reviewing cases. Our attorneys were still going to court and reviewing cases. As kids were being arrested, we were having detention hearings to make sure they didn't sit in custody and didn't have any type of hearing for as long as possible. We were trying to make sure that we were hearing those cases and making sure that they weren't sitting there just waiting. In addition, we were reviewing cases where kids were in placement to see if they could come home, to see if there were viable options that were safe for them and that were going to be positive for them and that were going to protect them not only from COVID-19, but from anything that lied waiting as they were sitting in placement, made sure they had secure environments to go to. So we were doing that while everyone else was, kind of home and the courts were just letting cases pile up. We were still actively making sure that we reviewed cases. Even to this point, we've, like I said earlier, collaborated with so many different entities to make sure that we all adjusted and pivoted to the needs and demands of COVID-19. So we worked collaboratively with the Juvenile Justice Services Center to make sure that we were able to get their population down to a number that was safe. Like I indicated earlier, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were around about 150 youth in local custody. In the spring or early summer, we were down to the low 100s, and we've remained in that area. Our hope is to get below that to the best of our ability. Beyond that, we've worked with juvenile probation to make sure that we were reviewing cases, getting viable discharge resources for young people that were in custody, not necessarily because of the act that they committed, but more so because they didn't have a place to go that was safe for them. So looking into those homes, looking into the people that were willing to take them into their care to make sure that they were going to be viable options. We've been working with the Defenders Association at a level that I've never seen in my career at the district attorney's office to make sure that we are reviewing cases, doing what's best as quick as possible. So that while kids are, also battling the pandemic and battling the stressors of that and the health concerns that come with that, because we would be naive to believe that they aren't, that we are also moving their cases along as quickly as possible so they're not overexposed to the system or having to come back to court multiple times and being overexposed to COVID-19. So those are amongst the many things that we've done to adjust our practices to try to circumvent the delays that would otherwise exist due to the pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to ask for first, I want to thank all who are tuned in and who've been listening in tonight. I hope this information has been very helpful for you, for your family, and for the communities that you serve. We're approaching the end of this town hall. I'm going to ask that each panelist We'll give about 2 to 3 minutes, final remarks, something you didn't say that you wanted to say, or perhaps you were answering a question earlier and you were triggered by another question, and perhaps put a note on your paper to make mention of something. What's a final remark that you want to give to our guest tonight before we end this town hall? We'll start with you, Mr. Listenby, and then Jordan, and finally Edie Combs.
I would just like to say thank you to all who are on the town hall or with us here in the town hall this evening. It's going to take a community that's committed to bringing about change for our children to really address the gun violence that's going on in our city and address the educational deficits with our kids throughout the city. So I want to encourage everybody to just recognize that each of us can do something to improve the lives of our children. I want to stress two things. One is the idea of reinvestment. We have saved the city and county of Philadelphia, the state of Pennsylvania, and the federal government millions and millions of dollars because of our new policies. Just reducing out-of-home placement has saved well over $50 million, probably closer to $75 or $100 million in just 1 year. So where has all the money gone? I don't know. Reducing the number of kids in resident, or even at the Philadelphia Juvenile Justice Services Center, saves dramatically. Where's all the money gone? What I would really love to see would be a conscientious group of folks with accounting backgrounds to take a close look at all the funding that was going into juvenile justice, but is no longer going into juvenile justice because of programs and new initiatives that we've developed that have improved the lives of our children. And let's find out where all the money is gone, and let's reinvest some of it so that we can solidify these programs in the community. The money used to go to the Glen Mills. It used to go to all these programs out west. Let's take some of that money that used to go to those places and reinvest it in our city, in our communities, to help our kids. If we can do that, we're going to improve the lives of families that are, first of all, working in these programs in our community, improve the lives of our children, and improve overall lives of our community as we go forward. So I'd like to just emphasize reinvestment, emphasize the fact that there are lots of savings that are going on, and encourage everybody to get involved to try and help us with the process of saving our kids in Philadelphia. Thank you.
Thank you, First Assistant Listenby. I'd like to thank everyone for your time, attention, and most importantly, your accountability and your community participation. To stress on that word accountability, I believe that part of accountability means being honest about the root causes of some of these concerns. For example, it's an unfortunate truth that girls are overlooked system-wide. We analyzed the data from 2019 and discovered that nearly half of all arrests for female youth in 2019 were for assaults. So we reached out to the community for the need. I'm grateful to work with Program Manager Faith Harris, who's been instrumental in spearheading the Unmasked Girls program, in which girls are connected with a certified anger management specialist, and then referred to community-based programs, including a cosmetology program, or a program called Beauty Fit Strong, which teaches young people everything from physical fitness with Zumba and weightlifting to nutrition and education. In terms of accountability, the research also suggests that youth crime comes from adolescent neurobehavioral tendencies. The brain science shows that youth succumb to peer pressure. They're more impulsive. They discount future consequences. The research shows that youth crime stems from adverse childhood experiences, the toxic stress that that affects young people at an early age, and the social determinants of health and crime, the conditions in which people are born, live, work, play, worship. It affects their access to quality, affordable healthcare, their access to educational opportunities, their access to housing, stable income, job security. So that's why the promotion of youth accountability, community safety, and victim restoration requires that we work with the community to diagnose these multi-pronged issues so that we can remove barriers to success. I thank you all for your time. We recognize that widespread systemic change requires long-term vision, multi-pronged solutions, and most importantly, community collaboration. We're always looking to build new relationships with community-based providers, so please reach out to us. We welcome your assistance in achieving balance and restorative justice together.
So I've been sitting here thinking to myself what my final words would be. And as I was doing that, I read a question by Nasir and I answered that question. And I keep being drawn back to Nasir because he's the reason why we're all here, right? Like young people like him are the reason why we should all care. Regardless of whether you have children or whether you don't, whether you have a close connection to a young person or you don't. People like Nasir, children like Nasir, are the reason why we all need to care, because we want him to succeed, right? Like I see a comment, not a question, but it's so awesome to see young men like Nasir engaging. And I was like, yep, 100% agree. Keep up the amazing work. And he's still asking questions. At 7:05 is when he sent his last question. So he obviously cares because this directly impacts him, but we should care too, because although we are not juveniles, and most of us on this call, if arrested, and I hope none of us are, would not end up in the juvenile justice system, but we should care about what happens to those young people because they are our community. They will be our community when we are all old and gray and, moving on to different things in our lives. They will be the ones to make sure that our city survives. And you need to make sure that they're in positions to do that, and that they're safe, and that they're cared for. And I think that is what I want to leave this conversation with, you all knowing that whether or not you've been a victim of crime, whether or not you know someone that's been a victim of crime, I mean, statistically, we all have, right? In some form or fashion. But we need to care because of young people like Nasir, because Nasir is the future. His peers are the future. Regardless of what you want to think or what you want to believe, they are the future, and we need to care about what happens to them. So to the extent that you can, get involved, engage, join conversations like that, like this one, volunteer your time, talk positivity into young people that you encounter, because regardless of whether you recognize it or not, every single encounter you have with a young person, whether they be in your family or the kid across the street, will matter to them. People will always remember how you made them feel and less about what you say. So I just want to leave this conversation with that in mind. And I hope that we all go forward and, to the best of your ability, touch a young person, speak positivity and love into them and encouragement, and hope that that goes a long way.
First Assistant Bob Listenby, Assistant District Attorney Jordan King, Assistant District Attorney Derek Holmes. Thank you so much for serving as panelists tonight. To all of the listening audience, thank you for staying on tonight. Some of you popped on, popped off. Some of you been on the entire time. And to young Nasir from Dobbins High School, major salutes to you, King. We appreciate all that you do. And we appreciate your questions tonight, remaining engaged with us throughout tonight's discussion. On behalf of DA Larry Krasner, our executive team, and our community engagement team here at the DA's office, we thank you so much for tuning in tonight.